So if you have watched my channel for any length of time, then you will know that I am a very, very big fantasy reader. It is one of my favorite genres. And today I want to talk to you guys about why it is that I enjoy fantasy. So stay tuned to see why it is that I read fantasy. Hello everyone, it is Samantha and I hope you guys are having a great day today. I'm excited about today's video because I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite things, and that is the fantasy genre. And I decided today I would kind of go over some of the reasons why I enjoy reading fantasy, because why not? So fantasy as a genre seems to be very hit and miss genre with people. You either kind of love it or you hate it. You want to read it and can't get enough of it, or you don't want anything to do with it whatsoever. Some people find it to be intimidating, which is understandable. Fantasy is a very large genre. It has a very diverse range of books. There are so many different types of fantasy out there, from epic fantasy to flintlock fantasy to grimdark fantasy. There's a lot of different genres of subgenres of fantasy out there. And actually, Michael from Bitten by a Radioactive Book did an excellent video series where he went over all of these different subgenres and what they entail and examples of them and things of that nature. So I'll be sure to link that down below because it's actually very, very informative, and even I, a fantasy lover, learned a lot from that video series. So definitely recommend checking that out if you are new to fantasy. So as you can see, fantasy can be very intimidating and it's not for everyone, but I decided it might be fun to share with you guys why I enjoy it. I started loving fantasy when I was 11 years old. My parents had me read The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. I could not get enough of those books. I was obsessed with them. I wanted to be in Middle-earth so bad, and basically the rest of history. I could not get enough of fantasy. I could not stop checking out different fantasy books in the library and figuring out what I liked and what I didn't like. And 17 years later, that has not changed whatsoever. I am still a massive lover of fantasy. But why is that? I think the primary reason why I love fantasy so much is that it's an escape, you know? You're going into a brand new world. This world that does not have the same rules that we have. It takes place in a completely different plane of reality. You have different characters, different races entirely, like creatures such as goblins and elves and dwarves and orcs and just different things like that. And it's an escape from the world that we live in, and I think that's why I love it so much, you know? Sometimes you want to forget about all the crappy things that happen on our Earth and instead read about all of the crappy things that happen in a completely different Earth that doesn't even exist. Primarily, I think, because you know it doesn't exist, so you feel a little bit better about that versus our reality where you know these horrible things happen and there's no escaping it. So I like the escapism of fantasy. It's nice to kind of escape into an adventure where the powers of good will prevail and peace will reign on the land. Not always, especially in the case of grimdark fantasy, but a lot of the times, you know, the good powers end up prevailing over the evil, and I think I just love the escapism of it. I love immersing myself into a whole new world where anything is possible, where heroes defeat the evil powers, and it's nice to kind of be along for the adventure. I may not be able to go out and wield a sword as a lady knight and fight against evil sorcerers, but I can definitely pretend I am while reading the Song of the Lioness Quartet by Tamora Pierce. I can pretend that I am Alanna while I'm reading and kind of immerse myself into the story and be there in the action. And I love that about fantasy. And I also love the imaginative quality of fantasy. I love that your imagination kind of runs wild with the genre. It is something new. So you have this movie playing in your mind. It is what you imagine it to look like. Yes, the author sets down descriptions of how things should look, but then your mind kind of takes over and it kind of paints this whole movie in your head of how you imagine it looking. I think for fantasy, all of these worlds, these characters look a little bit different to everyone, author descriptions aside, whereas with contemporary, they take place in our own world. And yes, everyone may imagine the characters differently, but in terms of the settings, it's probably always going to be the same because it takes place within our world. It's something that we know. So the imaginative quality is a little bit more limited than it is with fantasy, and I hope that makes sense because I feel like that's only making sense in my head. I also love how innovative it is. You can do so many things with fantasy. Anything is possible with fantasy. You can have different powers, you can have different weapons, you can have weapons that might exist in our world, such as guns, do something completely different in a fantasy world, and I think that is fantastic. I love how you can kind of take off with any idea and make it something new, and you don't have to be confined by anything that exists within our own reality because you're creating your own world, and I like that about it. I love how innovative it can be and how fun and fantastical it is. Another thing that I love about fantasy is how it can take social commentary to a whole new level. So a lot of fantasy can take social issues that are wrong in our own world and portray them in a fantasy world. And sometimes I think that it does a very good job of highlighting just how harmful these things are. It kind of makes you step out of your own reality a little bit and kind of view it from a different viewpoint, if that makes any sense, such as Robin Hobb books. Robin Hobb explores a lot of different social conflicts within her novels that take place in our own world, such as slavery and sexism and racism and bigotry on so many different levels. And I think that she does a really good job of highlighting these issues in her books, but you definitely get a better idea of how harmful these things are in our own world. It is easy to kind of become complacent in some ways when looking at social conflict and to be so rooted in our own ideas of what those things are and how things should work that in a fantasy novel you kind of strip away our societal norms because this is taking place in a whole new world, so you can view it in a different light. Basically what I'm just trying to say is because you're in a fantasy world in which the society might be structured differently and the norms of the society are different from ours, it might give you a different perspective upon these same social conflicts that take place in our own world. Really feel like that's not making any sense, but hopefully it is. You'll have to let me know. The next thing I really love about fantasy novels is just the entire range of the genre. Fantasy has just kind of boomed in the past 20 years, I think, and it has taken on a whole new life of its own, and it has been great to witness. We have gone from the traditional fantasy stories and tropes and cliches, and all of these authors have taken them and made it into something new, taken on and bringing it their own twists and taken on old characters and given them new life. You know, different authors portray elves in different ways and dwarves in different ways, and they've made them something new and fantastical. So I love the diversity in the stories and the writing, and even though you might encounter a fantasy story that this bare bones might be similar to every other fantasy story you have read before, but in essence it is different because the writing is different, the storytelling style is different, the characters themselves are portrayed in such a way that it is new, and I love the wide breadth and diversity of the fantasy genre and just how many authors have been able to take the bare bones of fantasy and make it into something new and beautiful and fantastic. Alright guys, so that was kind of my rambly discussion video on why I enjoy fantasy. Basically, I love the escapism nature of it, I love the imaginative qualities of it, the innovative qualities of it, the social commentary of it, as well as the diversity in terms of the genre and how authors portray their characters in their world. That is basically why I enjoy fantasy and why I enjoy reading it. You'll have to let me know if you love fantasy, what some of your reasons for loving fantasy are. You'll also let me know if any of these thoughts didn't make any sense, and I'll try to explain it better in writing down below. I'll try to clarify some of it if any of you guys are confused. I hope you guys enjoyed this discussion video. Thank you so much for watching, and until my next video, happy reading. Bye!